He really was there. I left with my son when he stopped playing and said, "There's a man hiding in the room," during the visit. Some moments change everything. You think you understand your world, your family, your reality. Then your 4-year-old son looks up from his toys and says something that makes your blood freeze. What happened next taught me that a parent's worst nightmare isn't always what you think it is. I never believed in mother's intuition until that Tuesday afternoon in March. The kind of gray, humid day that makes Seattle feel smaller than it actually is. I was 38, recently divorced, trying to rebuild my life with my son Jamie in a city that still felt foreign despite 3 years of calling it home. The apartment viewing seemed routine. I had seen dozens of places over the past month, each one either too expensive, too small, or in neighborhoods that made my skin crawl. This one was different. A ground floor unit in Capitol Hill, with hardwood floors and enough natural light to make even the gloomiest Pacific Northwest day bearable. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was a soft-spoken woman in her 70s who insisted I bring Jamie to see if he liked the space. "Children have good instincts about places," she had said over the phone. "If he feels comfortable, then it's meant to be." I should have paid more attention to those words. The building was a converted Victorian from the 1920s, with thick walls and original crown molding that spoke of better times. Mrs. Chen met us at the heavy oak front door, her keys jingling against a ceramic cat keychain. Jamie held my hand tightly as we climbed the 3 steps to the entrance, his other hand clutching his favorite action figure, a battered Captain America he had owned since he was 2. The apartment was on the 1st floor, at the end of a dimly lit hallway, lined with vintage wallpaper that showed its age in subtle water stains and faded edges. Mrs. Chen unlocked the door with the ceremony of someone who took pride in her property, explaining how the unit had been vacant for only 2 weeks since the previous tenant moved to Portland for work. "Very quiet tenant," she said, pushing the door open. "Never any complaints from neighbors." The living room was spacious by Seattle standards, with tall windows facing west toward the Space Needle. Late afternoon light filtered through gauze curtains, casting everything in a golden glow that made the empty space feel warm and inviting. Jamie immediately let go of my hand and began exploring, his sneakers squeaking against the polished hardwood as he ran from room to room. I followed Mrs. Chen through the apartment, taking mental notes about the updated kitchen, the generous bedroom closet, the bathroom with its clawfoot tub that would be perfect for Jamie's evening baths. She spoke in the practiced rhythm of someone who had shown this place many times, pointing out the original fixtures, the reliable heating system, the secure locks on all windows. "The neighborhood is very family-friendly," she was saying as we stood in the bedroom, watching Jamie inspect the empty closet with the intense curiosity only children possess. "There's a playground 2 blocks away, and the elementary school has an excellent reputation." I was mentally calculating rent and deposit when Jamie suddenly stopped playing. He stood perfectly still in the center of the living room, his action figure dangling from his small fingers. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor, and something in his posture made my chest tighten. "Mommy," he said, his voice smaller than usual. "There's a man hiding in the room." Mrs. Chen stopped mid-sentence. The silence that followed felt thick and strange, as if the air itself had changed temperature. I looked around the empty apartment, seeing nothing but bare walls and afternoon shadows. "What man, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, even as every maternal instinct began screaming. Jamie pointed toward the corner near the window, where the shadows were deepest. "He's watching us. He doesn't want us here." I felt Mrs. Chen's eyes on me, waiting to see how I would handle what she clearly assumed was childhood imagination. But Jamie wasn't the type of child who made things up. At 4, he was remarkably literal, the kind of kid who corrected adults when they exaggerated stories or used metaphors he didn't understand. I walked to the corner he was pointing at, feeling foolish but unable to ignore the ice-cold certainty spreading through my chest. There was nothing there, just walls and shadows and the faint smell of fresh paint trying to cover something older and less pleasant. "Jamie, I don't see anyone," I said, crouching down to his eye level. "Are you sure you saw a man?" He nodded with the absolute conviction that only small children possess. "He's still there. He's angry that we came." Mrs. Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. "Children sometimes have very active imaginations in new places," she said. "The shadows can play tricks." But Jamie wasn't looking at shadows anymore. He was staring at something specific, something that made his grip tighten on Captain America until his knuckles went white. His lower lip began to tremble, Not with the dramatic flair of a tantrum, but with genuine fear. That's when I knew we had to leave. I didn't make excuses or apologize for wasting Mrs. Chen's time. I simply scooped Jamie into my arms and said we needed to go. She followed us to the door, still talking about the apartment's features, but her voice sounded distant and hollow in the suddenly oppressive hallway. As we reached the front entrance, Jamie whispered in my ear, "He followed us, Mommy. He's still watching." I didn't look back. The drive home through Seattle's afternoon traffic gave me time to rationalize what had happened. Children see things adults miss, but that doesn't mean those things are real. Jamie had been through a lot of changes recently. The divorce, the move to a new city, starting preschool where he knew no one. It made sense that he might create imaginary threats in unfamiliar places. But rationalization couldn't explain the feeling that had settled in my chest like a cold stone. The absolute certainty that something had been wrong in that apartment. Not supernatural wrong, but human wrong. The kind of wrong that makes experienced mothers grab their children and run. I called my sister Rachel that evening after Jamie was asleep. She lived in Denver with her husband and twin daughters, and had always been my voice of reason during the chaos of single motherhood. "He probably just got spooked by the shadows," she said when I finished telling her about the apartment. "You know how kids are. Remember when Emma was convinced there was a monster in their basement? Turned out to be the furnace making noise." "This felt different," I said, pacing my current apartment's small kitchen, while keeping one ear tuned for any sound from Jamie's room. "You should have seen his face, Rachel. He wasn't making it up." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But that doesn't mean he saw what he thinks he saw. Kids process fear differently than we do. Maybe something about the place reminded him of somewhere else, or someone else." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to file the entire experience under childhood imagination and move on with my apartment search. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of my current neighborhood, I couldn't shake the image of Jamie's face in that empty living room, the way he had pointed at that corner with such certainty, the way his voice had changed when he said the man was angry. The next morning brought news that changed everything. I was making coffee and checking emails when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "Saw your inquiry about the Capitol Hill apartment. We need to talk. Important information about the previous tenant." I stared at the message for several minutes, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Mrs. Chen had said the previous tenant moved to Portland for work. A clean, simple explanation that left no room for complications. But someone thought I needed to know more. I waited until Jamie was at preschool before responding to the text. The reply came immediately, asking me to meet at a coffee shop on Pine Street, just a few blocks from the apartment building. The person signing the messages was Sarah, and she claimed to be the upstairs neighbor. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively quirky Seattle establishments, with mismatched furniture and local art covering every available wall surface. I arrived early and chose a table near the window, where I could see the street and feel less trapped if the conversation went badly. Sarah turned out to be a woman in her early 30s with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested she worked in tech. She spotted me immediately, probably because I was the only person sitting alone and checking my phone every few seconds. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but after Mrs. Chen mentioned someone had brought a child to see the apartment, I couldn't stay quiet. My stomach tightened. "What about the previous tenant?" Sarah ordered a latte before answering, her fingers drumming nervously against the table. "David Morrison didn't move to Portland for work," she said finally. "He disappeared 3 weeks ago. Just vanished. Left all his stuff, his car, everything. The police have been asking questions." The coffee shop noise seemed to fade into background static. "Disappeared how?" "No one knows. He was there one day, gone the next. Mrs. Chen found the door unlocked when she went to collect rent. Everything was still inside, including his wallet and phone. Like he just stepped out for a minute and never came back." I thought about Jamie pointing at that corner, about the way he had said the man was angry. Did you know him well? Well enough to know he wasn't the type to just leave. David was intense, kept to himself mostly, but when he did talk, it was usually about feeling watched or followed. I thought he was paranoid, maybe using drugs, but now what? Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The week before he disappeared, he knocked on my door at 2 a.m, said someone had been in his apartment while he was at work. Nothing was stolen, but things were moved around. Small things. A coffee mug in a different spot. Books rearranged. That kind of thing. My blood felt like ice water. Did he call the police? He tried. They took a report but didn't take it seriously. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. They suggested he might be experiencing stress or mental health issues. The rational part of my brain was working overtime, trying to process this information in a way that made sense. People didn't just vanish from locked apartments. There were explanations for everything. Logical reasons that didn't involve children seeing things that weren't there. But the mother part of my brain, the part that had grabbed Jamie and run the day before, was screaming that logic didn't matter. Something was wrong with that apartment. Something that had driven one man to paranoia and another to disappearance. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Sarah's expression was troubled. "Because Mrs. Chen is desperate to rent that place. She's been showing it to families with kids, and that feels wrong. If something happened to David in that apartment, if someone was stalking him or worse." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I was already thinking about Jamie's words, about how he had said the man was watching us, was angry that we came. I left the coffee shop with more questions than answers and a phone number for Detective Martinez, the officer who had taken David Morrison's missing person report. The walk back to my car felt different than usual, like I was being observed from every window and doorway. Paranoia, I told myself. The same kind of paranoia that had consumed David Morrison in his final weeks. But paranoia doesn't always mean you're wrong about being watched. That afternoon, while Jamie played at the community center playground, I called Detective Martinez. He was professional, but clearly busy, treating David Morrison as just another case in a city full of missing people who usually turned up eventually. "No evidence of foul play," he said when I explained my connection to the case. "Sometimes people just need to disappear for a while. Family problems, work stress, financial issues. We see it more than you'd think. But he left everything behind. His car, his wallet. That's unusual, but not unheard of. Some people want to vanish completely, start over somewhere new. We're keeping the case open, but without evidence of a crime, there's only so much we can do." I watched Jamie navigate the monkey bars with intense concentration, his tongue poking out slightly as he focused on each hand placement. 3 days ago, he had been just another preschooler with an active imagination. Now, he was the only witness to something that might be connected to a man's disappearance. "Detective Martinez," I said carefully, "if I told you a child claimed to see someone hiding in that apartment yesterday, would that change anything?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Ma'am," he said finally, "children see a lot of things that aren't there, but if you're genuinely concerned about safety, I'd recommend staying away from that location until we know more about Mr. Morrison's whereabouts." It was the closest thing to validation I was going to get from law enforcement. That evening, after Jamie was asleep, I found myself researching the building online. Property records, crime statistics, anything that might explain the growing certainty that we had stumbled into something dangerous. The building had been converted to apartments in 1973. Since then, it had changed hands several times, but there was nothing in the public records that suggested problems. No police reports, no complaints to the city, no unusual pattern of tenant turnover. But buried in a neighborhood forum from 2 years earlier, I found a thread titled "Weird Stuff on 12th Avenue." Most of the posts were typical urban complaints about noise and parking, but one caught my attention. Anyone else notice people watching that old Victorian apartment building? I live across the street and there's this guy who sits in a car outside for hours sometimes. Different cars, but always the same guy. Middle-aged, baseball cap, just sitting there. Gives me the creeps. The post was dated 18 months ago. No follow-up responses, no resolution. I spent the next hour scrolling through neighborhood social media groups, looking for similar reports. What I found was a pattern so subtle that it would be easy to dismiss as coincidence. Complaints about suspicious activity near the building. Reports of people feeling watched while walking past. A delivery driver who posted about getting bad vibes from the address. None of it proved anything. Urban neighborhoods were full of eccentric behavior and paranoid residents. But taken together, the reports painted a picture of a building that attracted the wrong kind of attention. I was still reading when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. "Hello?" I answered, expecting a sales call. Heavy breathing on the other end, then a voice I didn't recognize. Male, middle-aged, with the careful diction of someone trying to disguise their natural accent. You were at the apartment yesterday. With the boy. My heart stopped. Who is this? You need to stay away from there. For your own good. And for his. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had been watching the building. Someone had seen us with Mrs. Chen. Someone who had my phone number. The rational explanations were getting harder to maintain. I checked the locks on my apartment door twice before going to bed, and spent most of the night lying awake listening for sounds that didn't belong. Every creak of the building settling, every car passing on the street outside, every distant siren became a potential threat. At 3 a.m, I heard Jamie cry out in his sleep. I rushed to his room, expecting to find him tangled in sheets from a nightmare. Instead, he was sitting up in bed, staring at his closed bedroom window. "Mommy," he whispered, "the man from the room is outside." I looked toward the window, seeing only darkness and the faint reflection of our own apartment in the glass. "Jamie, honey, you were dreaming." But he shook his head with that same absolute certainty he had shown in the apartment. He followed us home. He's still angry. I pulled the curtains closed and sat on his bed until he fell back asleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. That something had followed us home from that empty apartment on Capitol Hill. The next morning brought clarity in the form of a decision I should have made days earlier. I wasn't going to wait for explanations or evidence. I wasn't going to rationalize away my son's fear or my own instincts. We were leaving Seattle. I had savings, and my freelance graphic design work could be done from anywhere with internet access. There was nothing tying us to this city except lease agreements, and the stubborn belief that running away was somehow admitting defeat. But sometimes running away is the smartest thing you can do. I spent the morning researching cities with good schools and affordable housing, places where a single mother and her 4-year-old son could disappear into suburban anonymity. By lunch, I had narrowed it down to 3 possibilities: Portland, Oregon, Boise, Idaho, and Salt Lake City, Utah. All far enough from Seattle to feel safe, all large enough to offer job opportunities. Jamie was at preschool when my phone rang again. Same unknown number as the night before. This time I didn't answer. The voicemail he left was short and to the point. Running won't help. He sees everything now. Distance doesn't matter. I deleted the message and immediately called my sister in Denver. "Rachel, I need you to listen to me without asking questions," I said when she answered. "Jamie and I are coming to stay with you for a while. Maybe permanently. What happened? You sound terrified. I can't explain it over the phone. Can you pick us up at the airport tomorrow night?" There was a pause, then the sound of Rachel's professional voice kicking in. She was a nurse practitioner, trained to handle crisis situations with calm efficiency. "Of course. Do you need me to buy the tickets?" "No, I'll handle that. Just, if anyone calls asking about us, you haven't heard from me. Okay?" "Okay. But Sarah, you're scaring me." "Good," I said. "You should be scared. I'll explain everything when we get there." I hung up and immediately booked 2 tickets on the earliest flight to Denver the next day. Then I called Jamie's preschool and told them he wouldn't be returning, citing a family emergency that required immediate relocation. The hardest call was to my current landlord, explaining that I needed to break my lease early. The conversation cost me 2 months' security deposit, but money seemed trivial compared to the growing certainty that staying in Seattle would put Jamie in danger. That afternoon, I picked Jamie up from preschool and told him we were going on an adventure to visit Aunt Rachel and his cousins. He accepted the news with the adaptability of childhood, already asking if we could bring Captain America on the airplane. We spent the evening packing essentials into 2 suitcases, leaving behind most of our furniture and belongings. I told myself it was temporary, that we would come back for our things once I figured out what was happening and how to handle it safely. But deep down, I knew we weren't coming back. As we prepared for bed in our stripped-down apartment, Jamie looked around his empty room with the solemn expression he wore when processing big changes. "Mommy, why are we leaving so fast?" I knelt down beside him, searching for words that would be honest without being terrifying. Sometimes grown-ups need to make quick decisions to keep their families safe. I think it's better for us to live somewhere else for a while. Because of the angry man. The question hit me like a physical blow. "What angry man, sweetie?" "The one who's been watching our house. He doesn't want us to leave." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Jamie, have you seen him here? At our apartment?" He nodded matter-of-factly. "He sits in the car across the street sometimes. When you're sleeping." My hands were shaking as I tucked him into bed. "When did you first notice him?" After we went to see the new house, he started coming that night. I kissed his forehead and told him everything would be okay, but inside I was falling apart. Someone had been watching our building. Someone had been monitoring our movements for 3 days, and I had been completely oblivious. After Jamie fell asleep, I positioned myself at the living room window with the lights off, peering through a gap in the curtains at the street below. For the first hour, I saw nothing but normal evening activity. Neighbors walking dogs, teenagers skateboarding, delivery drivers making their rounds. Then, at 11:30, a dark sedan pulled into a parking space directly across from my building. The driver turned off the engine but didn't get out. In the orange glow of the streetlight, I could make out the silhouette of a single occupant wearing what looked like a baseball cap, the same description from the neighborhood forum post I had found earlier. I watched for 20 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for some sign of what the person was doing. They never moved, never got out of the car, never even seemed to shift position. They were just watching. At midnight, I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone sitting in a car outside my apartment building. They've been there for over an hour, just watching. Is the person on private property? No, they're parked on the street. Have they threatened you or approached your building? No, but, ma'am, parking on a public street isn't illegal. Unless the person has committed a crime or made threats, there's nothing we can do. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. The system that was supposed to protect us had no framework for handling the kind of subtle menace that had invaded our lives. By 1 a.m, the car was gone, but I didn't sleep. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that normally would have depressed me, but now felt like protective camouflage. I had our suitcases by the door and was checking our flight status when Jamie wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. Is the angry man still outside? He asked, climbing onto a chair to look out the window. I gently guided him away from the glass. I don't think so, sweetie, but we're going to leave for the airport soon anyway. Good, he said with the simple logic of childhood. He makes me feel scared in my tummy. That phrase stayed with me as we gathered our final belongings. Children don't fake that kind of visceral fear. Whatever Jamie was perceiving, it was real enough to trigger his deepest survival instincts. Our flight wasn't until evening, but I wanted to spend the day away from the apartment. We went to the Pacific Science Center, where Jamie could play, and I could think in a crowded, safe environment. As he explored the interactive exhibits with the focused intensity only 4-year-olds possess, I found myself constantly scanning the crowds for faces that didn't belong. Paranoia had become my new normal. Around noon, while Jamie was mesmerized by a robotics display, my phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had been calling. This time there was no message, just a photograph. It was Jamie and me at the Science Center, taken from across the room less than 5 minutes earlier. My vision went white around the edges. Someone was here. Someone had followed us to what I thought was a safe public space and was documenting our movements in real time. I scooped Jamie into my arms despite his protests about wanting to finish watching the robot, and we left immediately. In the parking garage, I checked under my car and in the back seat before getting in, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop myself. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes through afternoon traffic, and I spent every minute of it checking my rearview mirror for cars that might be following us. By the time we reached SeaTac, I was so wound up that the TSA security checkpoint felt like a sanctuary. But even surrounded by federal agents and airport security, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Our flight boarded on time, and as the plane taxied away from the gate, I felt the first moment of genuine relief I had experienced in days. Whatever was happening in Seattle, we were leaving it behind. Distance would give us safety, and time would give me perspective to figure out what came next. I was wrong on both counts. The flight to Denver was uneventful. Jamie fell asleep before takeoff, exhausted from the stress of the past few days, and I used the time to research private investigators and security companies online. If the police wouldn't take the situation seriously, I would hire someone who would. Rachel met us at baggage claim with her typical efficiency, taking one look at my face and immediately switching into crisis management mode. She didn't ask questions during the drive to her house in Littleton, just kept up a steady stream of chatter about her daughter's school activities and the unusually warm weather Denver had been having. It wasn't until Jamie was asleep in the guest room and we were sitting in Rachel's kitchen with glasses of wine that I finally told her everything. The apartment viewing, Jamie's claims about seeing a man, the disappearance of David Morrison, the phone calls. The surveillance. She listened without interruption, her nurse's training evident in the way she absorbed information without judgment. So you think this person, whoever they are, was watching the building where this man disappeared, she said when I finished. And when you showed up with Jamie, you became a threat somehow. I think Jamie saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Something that proves David Morrison didn't just walk away from his life. Like what? I don't know. Maybe David is still in that apartment. Maybe he never left at all. The words hung in the air between us, making real the possibility I had been trying not to think about for days. That David Morrison hadn't disappeared voluntarily. That someone had made him disappear, and Jamie had somehow perceived evidence of what had happened. Sarah, Rachel said carefully, you're talking about murder. I'm talking about my son seeing things that scare him. Everything else is just trying to make sense of that. She refilled our wine glasses and was quiet for several minutes, processing. What are you going to do? Stay here until I can figure out a permanent plan. Maybe hire someone to investigate what really happened to David Morrison. Prove that Jamie wasn't imagining things. And if he was imagining things, I had been asking myself the same question for days. Then I've uprooted our entire life because I trusted a 4-year-old's perception over adult logic. But Rachel, you didn't see his face. You didn't hear the certainty in his voice. Jamie doesn't make things up. Kids don't make things up intentionally, she agreed. But they process reality differently than we do. Trauma, stress, big changes can make them see threats that aren't really there. She was right, and I knew it. But knowing it didn't change the fact that someone had been watching our apartment building. Someone had followed us to the science center. Someone had taken our photograph and sent it to me as a message. The next morning brought news that changed everything again. I was making breakfast for Jamie and Rachel's twins when Detective Martinez called from Seattle. His voice was different than before, more focused and urgent. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you some follow-up questions about David Morrison and the apartment you visited. Did you find him? We found something. Can you tell me exactly what your son said he saw in that apartment? My pulse quickened. He said there was a man hiding in the room, that the man was watching us, and was angry that we came. Where specifically did he say he saw this man? In the corner near the window, the shadowy corner of the living room. Detective Martinez was quiet for several seconds. Ms. Chen, we executed a search warrant on that apartment yesterday. We found human remains behind a false wall in exactly the location your son described. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto Rachel's kitchen counter. I could hear Detective Martinez calling my name, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Jamie had been right. There had been a man in that room. David Morrison had never left the apartment at all. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. How long had he been there? The medical examiner is still working on that, but preliminary findings suggest several weeks, consistent with the timeline of his disappearance. So someone killed him and hid the body in his own apartment. That's what we're investigating. But I need to ask you something important. Did anyone else know that your son claimed to see someone in that apartment? The question sent ice through my veins. Mrs. Chen, the landlord. And I mentioned it to you. Anyone else? Did you post about it online? Tell friends or family? Just my sister. Why? Because whoever did this has been monitoring that apartment. We found surveillance equipment hidden in the building across the street. Someone's been keeping watch, probably waiting to see if anyone discovered what they'd done. Everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. The phone calls, the car outside my building, the photograph at the science center. Someone had been watching to see if Jamie and I were a threat to their secret. Detective Martinez, we're in Denver now. Are we safe here? I honestly don't know. This person has demonstrated significant resources and planning capability. I'm going to recommend you stay where you are while we work the case. Do you have any suspects? We're looking into it. Mrs. Chen is being questioned, but between you and me, she seems genuinely shocked. This was probably someone who knew Morrison's routine, knew when the apartment would be empty. After I hung up, I found Rachel standing in the doorway with an expression of stunned disbelief. You heard? She nodded. Jamie really did see someone in that room. A dead someone, hidden behind a wall where no living person should have been able to see him. We stared at each other, both trying to process the implications. My 4-year-old son had somehow perceived the presence of a murder victim, not through supernatural means, but through the kind of heightened awareness that children sometimes possess when adults miss the obvious. How could he have known? Rachel asked. Maybe he smelled something. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he just sensed that the space felt wrong in a way that adults would rationalize away. But he said the man was watching you. Hiding. Not dead. That was the part I couldn't explain. Jamie had described an active presence. Someone who was angry about our intrusion. Not passive remains of a victim, but something that felt alive and aware. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls. Detective Martinez called back with updates. A prosecutor called to discuss my potential testimony. A victim advocate called to explain witness protection protocols. By afternoon, the story had leaked to local media. Child leads police to hidden murder victim was the headline on every Seattle news website. Fortunately, they were keeping our names out of the coverage, but I knew that wouldn't last long. That evening, while the girls played upstairs and Jamie watched cartoons, Rachel and I sat on her back deck trying to make sense of our new reality. "They're going to want you to come back to Seattle for the trial," she said. "I know, but not until they catch whoever did this. What if they don't catch him?" It was the question I had been avoiding. What if David Morrison's killer was never found? What if the person who had been stalking us was still out there, still watching, still waiting? "Then we disappear," I said. "New names, new city, complete fresh start. Sarah, you can't live your whole life running from shadows. I can if it keeps Jamie safe." My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Unknown number, but this time with a Denver area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello? You thought distance would help." The same voice from Seattle, but clearer now, as if the caller was nearby. "You thought Denver would be far enough." My blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "I know everything about you now, Sarah. Where you work, where your sister lives, where Jamie goes to preschool in the fall." Running was pointless. Rachel saw my face and immediately called 911 on her own phone. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "I want you to understand that secrets have consequences. Your son saw something he shouldn't have seen, and now you both know something you shouldn't know. The police already found David Morrison's body. They know he was murdered. What I know doesn't matter anymore. It matters because you can identify me, because your son can place me at that apartment. Jamie never saw you. He saw David's body." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had ended. "Your son has a very special gift," the voice said finally. "He sees things other people miss. Dead things. Hidden things. That makes him dangerous to people like me." The line went dead. Rachel was already talking to the 911 dispatcher, giving them our address and explaining the situation. Within minutes, we could hear sirens approaching, but I knew the police wouldn't find anything. Whoever this person was, they were too careful, too experienced to be caught making threatening phone calls from a traceable location. The real message had been delivered. They had found us in Denver. They knew where we were staying, and they believed Jamie possessed some kind of supernatural ability that made him a permanent threat. The next morning brought a call from Detective Martinez with news that should have been encouraging, but somehow felt ominous instead. "We made an arrest," he said. "Thomas Brennan, 42 years old, worked as a building maintenance contractor, had access to properties all over Capitol Hill, including Mrs. Chen's building. Is he the one who was calling me? We're still investigating that, but here's the thing that's bothering me. Brennan has been in custody since yesterday afternoon, but Denver PD says you received a threatening call last night." My stomach dropped. "So either he has an accomplice, or you arrested the wrong person. That's what we're trying to figure out. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you consider the witness protection protocols we discussed." Witness protection meant disappearing completely, giving up our identities, and starting over with names and histories created by federal marshals. It was the ultimate running away, and it was beginning to look like our only option. But before I could make that decision, I needed to understand what was really happening. Why someone thought Jamie posed such a unique threat. What they believed he had seen or could see that made him worth following across state lines. That afternoon, while Jamie napped and Rachel was at work, I called a child psychologist in Denver who specialized in trauma and perception disorders. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes agreed to see us that evening, though she warned me that a single session wouldn't provide definitive answers. Her office was in a converted Victorian house near downtown Denver, with soft lighting and child-friendly decorations that immediately put Jamie at ease. Dr. Hayes was a woman in her 50s with the kind of calm presence that made both children and adults feel safe. "Jamie," she said, after the three of us were settled in her consultation room, "your mom tells me you saw something in an empty apartment in Seattle. Can you tell me about that? Jamie looked at me for permission, then nodded. There was a man hiding behind the wall. He was sad and angry. What did the man look like? I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him watching us. He didn't want us to be there. Dr. Hayes made notes while Jamie talked, occasionally asking gentle follow-up questions. After 20 minutes, she asked him to play with some toys while she spoke privately with me. What he's describing isn't unusual, she said, once we were alone in an adjoining office. Children often have heightened sensitivity to environmental cues that adults miss. Changes in air pressure, subtle sounds, even electromagnetic fields from hidden wiring or pipes. But he described the exact location where police later found a body, which suggests he was picking up on something real. A smell, perhaps, or a sound that indicated something was wrong in that space. The human brain is remarkably good at detecting decay, even in trace amounts. What about his certainty that someone was watching us, and his claim that the same person has been following us? Dr. Hayes was quiet for several moments. Children who experience trauma sometimes develop hypervigilance. They become extraordinarily sensitive to potential threats, real or imagined. The divorce, the move to a new city, and now this frightening situation could have triggered that response. So you think he's imagining the surveillance? I think he's responding to your stress. Children are incredibly attuned to their parents' emotional states. If you're frightened and paranoid, he will absorb those feelings and create explanations for them. It was a rational explanation that addressed most of what had been happening, but it didn't explain the phone calls or the photograph at the science center. It didn't explain how someone had tracked us from Seattle to Denver. When we returned to Rachel's house that evening, I found my sister pacing in her kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. She looked up when we came in, and I could see fear in her eyes. "I have to go," she said into the phone, then hung up and turned to me. That was the school district. Someone called this afternoon asking about enrollment for Jamie, claiming to be his father. My ex-husband lived in California and had no interest in Jamie's education. He hadn't even called in 6 months. What did they tell them? Nothing, because I had already contacted them about the situation. But Sarah, someone is actively trying to locate you through official channels. We need to leave Denver, I said. And go where? If they found you here, they can find you anywhere. She was right. Running wasn't solving the problem. It was just creating new opportunities for whoever was hunting us to demonstrate their reach and resources. That night, after Jamie was asleep, I made a decision that went against every protective instinct I possessed. I was going back to Seattle, not to hide or run, but to end this, to find out who had killed David Morrison and why they thought Jamie was a threat worth pursuing across multiple states, to confront whatever dark secret had followed us from that empty apartment. Rachel thought I was insane. You'll be walking into a trap. Maybe, but right now we're trapped anyway. At least in Seattle, I'll have police protection and the chance to identify who's been stalking us. What about Jamie? He stays here with you, safe and far away from whatever's waiting for me. But when I explained the plan to Jamie the next morning, he surprised me with his response. "I have to come with you, Mommy. The angry man won't stop until he talks to me. Sweetie, it's not safe for you in Seattle right now. It's not safe for me anywhere," he said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that sometimes emerged from his 4-year-old perspective. "But in Seattle, the police can help us." That afternoon, I called Detective Martinez and told him we were coming back. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed to provide protection and coordinate with a federal task force that had taken interest in the case. "We think Morrison's murder is connected to a larger pattern," he explained. "Similar disappearances in other cities, all involving people who lived alone in buildings where this maintenance contractor had access. So Thomas Brennan is your suspect after all? Brennan is part of it, but not all of it. We think he was working with someone else, someone who handled the surveillance and cleanup. That's probably who's been following you." The flight back to Seattle felt like diving into dark water. I didn't know what we would find when we surfaced, but I knew that running hadn't protected us, and hiding wouldn't solve the problem. Jamie slept for most of the flight, his head against my shoulder, and Captain America clutched in his small hands. Looking at him, I wondered what kind of mother brings her child back into danger, instead of keeping him as far away as possible. But I also remembered his words from that morning. "The angry man won't stop until he talks to me." Maybe Jamie understood something about this situation that I was missing. Maybe his heightened perception extended beyond seeing hidden things to understanding what those things meant. Or maybe I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Detective Martinez met us at SeaTac with 2 other officers and an unmarked car. The security detail felt both reassuring and ominous, a reminder that we were walking back into genuine danger. "We've got you set up in a safe house in Bellevue," he said as we drove through the familiar Seattle landscape. 24-hour protection until we wrap this up. How close are you to making another arrest? Closer than we were yesterday. We've identified Brennan's partner, a guy named Marcus Webb, who runs a private investigation business, specializes in surveillance and background checks, which explains how he was able to track your movements so effectively. Where is he now? That's what we're trying to figure out. He cleared out of his office 3 days ago, right after we arrested Brennan. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happened. It should have felt secure, but as we pulled into the driveway, Jamie tensed in his car seat. "He's here," he whispered. I looked around the peaceful street, seeing nothing but normal suburban evening activity. "Who's here, sweetie?" "The angry man. He's been waiting for us." Detective Martinez heard this and immediately called for backup units. Within minutes, the street was flooded with police cars, officers conducting door-to-door searches and checking every vehicle in the area. They found nothing, but as we were being escorted into the safe house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, in the window of a house that appeared empty, I caught a glimpse of movement. Just a shadow shifting behind curtains, but it was enough. Someone had indeed been waiting for us. The next morning brought the confrontation I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Marcus Webb turned himself in. He walked into the Seattle Police Department at 8 a.m., accompanied by a lawyer, and confessed to the murder of David Morrison and the systematic stalking of my family. But his confession raised more questions than it answered. He claims Morrison discovered the surveillance operation in his building, Detective Martinez explained when he called to update me. Says Morrison was going to expose a network of illegal monitoring that Webb had been running for years. So he killed him to keep him quiet? That's where it gets weird. Webb says he didn't mean to kill Morrison, says they struggled. Morrison fell and hit his head, and Webb panicked and hid the body. What about following us? The phone calls, the threats. He admits to all of that. But here's the thing, Ms. Chen. Webb claims he was trying to warn you, not threaten you. Warn me about what? According to him, there's someone else involved. Someone who hired him to monitor Morrison and several other tenants. When Morrison died accidentally, this person told Webb to cover it up and make it look like Morrison had simply disappeared. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with Seattle's morning fog. Who hired him? He won't say. Claims he's more afraid of this person than he is of a murder conviction. But he insists that you and Jamie are still in danger, that turning himself in won't end the threat. After Detective Martinez hung up, I sat in the safe house kitchen trying to process this new information. If Webb was telling the truth, then we had been running from the wrong person. The real threat was still out there, still watching, still waiting. But why would someone want multiple tenants monitored? What was the connection between David Morrison and the other victims Webb had mentioned? That afternoon, while Jamie played under the watchful eyes of our protective detail, I called Mrs. Chen. "I need to ask you something," I said when she answered. "The other tenants in your building, both current and former, have any of them reported feeling watched or followed?" "Why would you ask such a thing?" "Because David Morrison wasn't the only victim. There were others, in other buildings." The silence on Mrs. Chen's end stretched long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. "Mrs. Chen, there have been incidents," she said finally. "Tenants who complained about feeling unsafe. People who broke their leases suddenly without explanation." "How many people? Over the past 3 years? Maybe a dozen." I assumed it was the neighborhood changing, becoming less desirable. Did they all live in the same type of unit? Ground floor, corner apartments, anything like that? Now that you mention it, yes. They were all in units with good views of the street, good vantage points. The pieces were starting to come together in a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. Someone had been using residential buildings as surveillance platforms, recruiting or coercing tenants to monitor activities in their neighborhoods. But what were they watching for? And why kill anyone who refused to cooperate? That evening brought answers I wasn't prepared for. Detective Martinez arrived at the safe house with FBI agent Sarah Coleman, a woman in her 40s who specialized in organized crime investigations. "We've been tracking a surveillance network that spans multiple cities," Agent Coleman explained as we sat in the safe house living room. Someone has been systematically monitoring federal witnesses, law enforcement families, and other protected individuals. Protected from what? From retaliation by organized crime figures. The people being watched are all connected to major prosecutions from the past 5 years. My mind raced through the implications. You think David Morrison was connected to a federal case? We think David Morrison was recruited to watch someone else, someone who lived or worked in a building he could observe from his apartment window. But he refused. He got suspicious about what he was being asked to do and started asking questions. That made him a liability. Agent Coleman pulled out a map of Capitol Hill with several locations marked in red. These are all buildings where we've identified suspicious tenant behavior over the past 3 years. Your son's ability to detect Morrison's body has helped us connect these locations to a much larger criminal enterprise. I looked at the map, seeing a pattern of surveillance positions that covered most of downtown Seattle and several residential neighborhoods. Who's running this operation? We're still working on that, but we believe it's connected to the Torino crime family. They've been trying to eliminate witnesses in several ongoing federal cases. The name meant nothing to me, but Agent Coleman's expression suggested it should have. Michael Torino was indicted last year on racketeering charges. His trial is scheduled to begin next month, and several key witnesses have already disappeared or been found dead. So you think whoever hired Marcus Webb is working for the Torinos? We think Marcus Webb was expendable. A middle manager who could be sacrificed if the operation was discovered. The real money and power behind this network is still out there. That night, as I lay in the safe house bedroom listening to Jamie's steady breathing in the bed next to mine, I tried to process everything we had learned. We had stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple murder case. Jamie hadn't just seen a dead body in that apartment. He had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatened federal witnesses and law enforcement families across multiple states. And now we were part of that conspiracy, whether we wanted to be or not. The climax came 3 days later, in a way I never could have anticipated. I was making breakfast when Agent Coleman arrived with news that changed everything. We've identified the person who hired Marcus Webb, she said. Angela Torino, Michael Torino's daughter. She's been running the surveillance operation while her father prepared for trial. Have you arrested her? We can't find her. She disappeared 2 days ago right after Webb confessed. But we have reason to believe she's still in Seattle. Why would she stay? Wouldn't she run? Agent Coleman's expression was grim. Because she views your son as the biggest threat to her family's operation. Jamie's testimony could connect the surveillance network to Morrison's murder, which could bring down the entire conspiracy. You think she's going to come after him? I think she's going to try to eliminate the threat before she disappears permanently. As if summoned by our conversation, Jamie appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, but with the alert expression he wore when something had captured his attention. The angry lady is coming, he said matter-of-factly. She's almost here. Agent Coleman was already reaching for her radio when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing the safe house in red emergency lighting. Through the kitchen window, I could see that the entire neighborhood had lost power. This is Coleman, she said into her radio. We have a situation at the safe house, requesting immediate backup. But the radio crackled with static. No response. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. The soft click of the front door opening. Someone was inside the house. Agent Coleman drew her weapon and motioned for Jamie and me to get behind the kitchen island. In the red emergency lighting, every shadow looked like a potential threat. Federal agent, Agent Coleman called out. Identify yourself. The response came from the living room, spoken in a woman's voice with a slight accent I couldn't place. My name is Angela Torino. I'm here to talk to the boy. Ma'am, you need to leave this residence immediately. You're trespassing on federal property. I'm here to offer a deal. Safe passage for everyone in exchange for 5 minutes alone with the child. I pulled Jamie closer to me, feeling his small body trembling against mine. But when I looked at his face, I didn't see fear. I saw the same focused concentration he had shown in David Morrison's apartment. She's scared, he whispered to me. She's more scared than we are. Agent Coleman was trying her radio again, but we all knew help wasn't coming in time. The power outage and communication blackout meant Angela Torino had planned this carefully. What do you want with my son? I called out. I want to understand what he saw in that apartment, what he knows about my operation. He's 4 years old. He doesn't know anything about your operation. He sees things others don't see. Dead things. Hidden things. That makes him dangerous to my family. Jamie tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, she doesn't understand. I don't see dead people. I see places where something bad happened. His words hit me like lightning. All this time I had been thinking about Jamie's perceptions in supernatural terms. But what if it was simpler than that? What if he was just extraordinarily sensitive to environmental evidence of violence or trauma? Angela, I called out. My son doesn't have supernatural abilities. He's just sensitive to changes in his environment. Sounds, smells, things that indicate something is wrong. Then how did he know exactly where Morrison's body was hidden? Because hiding a body changes the space around it. Air circulation, humidity, subtle sounds. Children notice things adults ignore. The silence from the living room stretched long enough that I began to hope she was considering this explanation. Then footsteps approached the kitchen. Angela Torino appeared in the doorway, like something from a nightmare. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of sharp features that would be beautiful under different circumstances. But her eyes held the flat, emotionless stare of someone who had moved far beyond normal human empathy. She was pointing a gun at Agent Coleman. "Drop your weapon," she said. Agent Coleman hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed her gun on the kitchen counter. "Now," Angela said, turning her attention to Jamie and me. "We're going to have that conversation." But Jamie surprised everyone by standing up and walking toward her. "Jamie, no!" I reached for him, but he was already moving. "You don't have to be scared," he said to Angela, in the same gentle voice he used when trying to comfort other children at preschool. "The bad thing that happened wasn't your fault." Angela's gun wavered slightly. "What bad thing?" "Someone hurt you when you were little. That's why you hurt other people now. But you don't have to keep doing it." For a moment, Angela Torino looked like what she really was, a young woman who had been shaped by violence into something monstrous. Her gun hand trembled, and I saw something that might have been tears in her eyes. Then the moment passed, and the predator returned. "You don't know anything about me," she said, raising the gun. That's when Agent Coleman moved. The next few seconds happened in a blur of motion and sound. Agent Coleman lunged for her weapon. Angela spun toward her. I grabbed Jamie and dove behind the kitchen island. 2 gunshots echoed through the house, impossibly loud in the confined space. When the silence returned, I cautiously raised my head above the island. Agent Coleman was on the floor, clutching her shoulder but alive. Angela Torino was also on the floor, motionless, her gun several feet away from her outstretched hand. "Is she dead?" I whispered. Agent Coleman struggled to reach her radio with her uninjured arm. "This is Coleman. Shots fired at the safe house. Need medical and backup immediately." This time, the radio worked. As sirens approached in the distance, Jamie climbed into my lap and buried his face against my chest. "Is the angry lady going to be okay?" he asked. I looked at Angela Torino's still form and realized I didn't know how to answer that question. She had terrorized us, threatened to kill us, destroyed multiple lives in service of her family's criminal enterprise. But she had also been someone's child once, before violence and fear had twisted her into something unrecognizable. "I don't know, sweetie," I said finally. "But the scary things she did are over now." The aftermath took weeks to resolve. Angela Torino survived her injuries and eventually pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges. Marcus Webb's cooperation led to the dismantling of the entire surveillance network and several other arrests. Michael Torino's trial proceeded as scheduled, and without the witness intimidation campaign his daughter had been running, several key witnesses felt safe enough to testify. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. Jamie and I eventually returned to Denver, where we started the process of building a normal life again. But normal felt different now. We had seen too much, survived too much, to ever completely return to the innocent assumptions that had defined our world before that Tuesday afternoon in March. Jamie still occasionally mentions seeing things that make him uncomfortable, but now I understand that his perceptions are a gift rather than a curse. He notices what others miss, senses danger that adults rationalize away, sees truth in places where most people see only shadows. And I've learned to trust those perceptions, even when they lead us into dark places. Because sometimes the scariest thing about the monsters hiding in our world is that they're not supernatural at all. They're human beings who have chosen to abandon their humanity in pursuit of power and control. But sometimes, just sometimes, a child's innocent clarity can cut through all that darkness and reveal the truth that adults have been too frightened or too cynical to see. Jamie really did see a man hiding in that room, and because he was brave enough to tell me what he saw, because I was desperate enough to believe him, a killer was caught, and a conspiracy was exposed. The angry man wasn't angry at us for intruding on his territory. He was angry that it had taken so long for someone to find him and give him justice. David Morrison had been waiting in that apartment for someone to notice, someone to care enough to look beyond the obvious explanations and see the truth hidden behind false walls. It just took a 4-year-old boy to finally set him free.